Nestled safely within the bosom of the city sat the front gates leading onto the grounds of Trossum Castle. A confident Moran warrior sauntered through the gates and rubbed at her tired eyes. Unlike the peasants in the kingdom of Nath surrounding her, she was not a human, and she was not an active morning person. However, today she had eagerly risen with the sun and was brimming with excitement to begin her journey. A raven had brought her a letter from the Lady Nakarada de Laslin of Trossum, which had made clear that the marked human female would no longer be in attendance on this expedition. This revelation had agitated the Moran, as her ambitions had included the manipulation of information from the Elder Marked. Nakarada was one of the few to have fallen victim to the barriers surrounding the Isles of Pi and survive. The Moran had long been fascinated by the secrets of these isles and was determined to uncover them all by any means necessary. Following this daydreaming Moran was a bodyguard and traveling companion, a male human and former knight. His every action broadcast to onlookers that he held many rotations of experience and training. His graceful, purposeful steps showed that he had an impeccable sense of balance. His squared shoulders and perfect posture projected the intimidating discipline that he had endured, and his handsome features wore no expression, as his ever-alert eyes consistently searched for signs of danger. The Moran smiled as the pair drew near the libraries of Trossum. All of her hard work to leave the matriarchy of Mo behind and to defy her people would finally begin to pay off for her, just as soon as she could leave the shores of the eastern continent behind. The local noblemen and ladies sneered in her direction as she jogged up the last steps leading to the large wooden doors of the library. The heated gazes from the humans fazed her little, as she had already grown accustomed to such reactions over her travels through Nath. She could care no less about the opinions of humans.
Pardon me, miss. Are you by any chance the Lady Pethara De'Amos of Mo?
Pethara jumped and spun on her toes to locate the owner of the small voice, as she hadn't expected any of the humans in this kingdom to know of her by name. The only person in Nath that should have been aware of Pethara's visit was Nakarada, but this voice was far too young to belong to the wise old headmistress.
Who's asking?
Pethara's bodyguard barely glanced over the young girl. He considered her to pose no real threat, despite the obvious markings painted down the backs of her fingers indicating her ability to cast spells. Instead, he turned his gaze onto the armored knight standing behind the girl. The kid was barely old enough to have passed his initiation, but was obviously present to act as the girl's bodyguard. Both knights sized each other up in silence with intimidating stares.
I apologize. Please, allow me to introduce myself. I am the Lady Rila De'Andra of Atham, and this is my escort, Sir Amie Eudy of Caliphas.
Amie was uninterested in the conversation as he stood, waiting to leave. His stance was stiff, much less graceful than the stance of the older knight. Pethara eyed Rila skeptically, but said nothing as she mentally judged the girl's young appearance.
My aunt, the Lady Nakarada de Laslin of Trossum, she should have informed you that I would be accompanying you in her stead on this expedition.
Rila tilted her head, causing sunlight to bounce off the large gold earrings dangling from her earlobes. Pethara took an instant disliking to Rila and her sparkling attire. Surely this was a mistake. The girl appeared to be even younger than her bodyguard, and Pethara could hardly place her trust in a toddler with a sword.
You are the Lady Pethara De'Amos of Mo, are you not?
I was caught off guard by your sudden greeting. How do you do? I am indeed Pethara. Just Pethara. And this is my bodyguard, Sir Davomir De'Sohbris of Caliphas.
The former knight, Davomir, mumbled a half-hearted greeting and gave Rila a nod of his head, but he was just as uninterested in the conversation as Amie. Small talk was not one of his strong suits, you see, and he was eager to make way before he could be recognized.
How do you do? The ship that will be taking us to Rajdarika should be departing from the docks here in Trossum fairly soon now.
Rila pointed toward the seaside edge of Trossum, where Pethara could see the billowing sails of ships beyond the rooftops of the city.
We're just waiting for Triff to join us before we head over to the ship.
I take it that Triff is a Vorm.
Pethara had guessed from the name Triff and from the fact that Rila was scanning the sky with a hand over her eyes to block out the rays of brilliant sunlight. Rila nodded her head, and Pethara fought back her urge to sneer with disgust.
Great! We shall have a fluffy rat along for the trip as well. Why not?
Nothing else about this trip has come to plan so far.
Pethara disliked the Varm species based on the research that she had done on them. Varm can only be understood by those with whom they have bonded. To everyone else on Ytralas, their language sounded like a series of cooing, meowing gibberish. Even if Pethara hadn't come to find their language annoying, she would still find them difficult to trust, as it was well known that they held close ties with the Dark Titan god Rebuk, gifting them the power of stealth magic known as shadow walking. It made the Varm excellent hunters, but even better thieves and assassins.
Would you mind terribly if we went on ahead and met you at the ship then? I should like to get settled as soon as possible. I have work to do.
No, please. Go get yourselves situated on the ship. We shall be setting sail on the Andine, on the far left end of the docks. Go on ahead. We shan't be far behind you.
Rila watched Pethara and Davomir as they walked away, disappearing into the crowds. There was still no sign of movement in the sky above them, and so Rila turned to gaze onto her escort. There was something about him which she could not place her finger on. Although she found him to be attractive, there was another feeling inside of her that she could not identify, and it was making her nervous. Rila's cheeks flushed then, as she suddenly realized that she had been staring at him.
Oh, looks like I've arrived at just the right moment.
The Varm purred from above with a coy smile upon her furry lips, her eyes bouncing between the two humans.
You're late, Triff. We must get going. The others have already set out for the ship.
Rila lifted her bags and shortly thereafter felt the weight of Triff settling across her shoulders. The additional weight caused her to sway unsteadily on her feet.
You are lucky that we did not leave you behind.
She snapped in annoyance under her breath. Triff simply chuckled in response. Allow me to assist you, my lady. Emery offered, taking Rila's bag from her shoulder. He was surprised at the weight of the bag and realized from the clinking sounds within that it was filled with coin.
She must be carrying 100 coin in this bag. I suppose she must be taking on the role of benefactor from her aunt.
He hefted her bag over his shoulder and motioned towards the docks. After you. Waterflies flopped about inside of Rila's nervous guts. Her palms grew moist with sweat, and her throat felt drier than cotton. The back of her neck grew hot quickly under the warmth of the sun and Triff's thick fur.
Thank you, Sir Emery.
Rila stammered nervously as she began to power walk toward the Andine. She didn't want him to notice the mortified mask upon her face in that moment. She couldn't even begin to comprehend what her problem was, as she had never felt so nervous when speaking with anyone in the past. Suddenly, Rila was beginning to regret participating in this expedition. The city of Trossum was bustling and busy today, like most every day. Women toted their children along with their groceries up and down the streets, alongside the paroling guards in their clinking, glittering chainmail armor. Travelers and shoppers loitered in the various market stands with varying levels of interest, and loud shopkeepers yelled out grand promises for their common products. Still confused by her sudden anxious nerves, Rila strained to think of something to say to her new companion. Her mind betrayed her and sat as blank as fresh parchment.
I'm trying too hard at this. Have you ever traveled outside the city, Sir Emery?
The Knights Guild is based in Caliphas, my lady. I've been to many cities.
Rila's heart felt as though it had been squeezed with an ancient giant folk's hand as she thought to herself.
I knew that. He must think I'm an absolute simpleton. What's wrong with me today?
Longshoremen, fishermen, and travelers rushed around the docks at the hastened paces of those with somewhere else to be and little time to spare.
Over there.
Emery tilted his head to the left, indicating which ship was the Andine. At the base of the ramp to the ship, Pethara stood with her arms crossed in impatience. Davomir stood beside her, looking uncomfortable and shifty.
Sorry that we're late.
Rila said, though she knew that the captain would have waited for her. Narama's coin and reputation would have prevented the man from daring to leave her behind. Emery didn't stop the chat, but instead made his way onto the deck and slipped from Rila's view.
Driff, this is Pethara and Sir Davomir De'Sohbris of Caliphas. They are the travelling companions that, Aunt Narama mentioned?
Again, Davomir gave only a curt nod in response. Pethara plastered a fake smile across her face and warmly greeted Triff, who threw her nose up in the air in response.
Do not mind Triff. You know how Vorm can be with their mood swings.
If Triff could have murdered Rila with her gaze, then the human girl would have perished on the spot.
You started this, remember that.
Triff snorted and decided to ignore them all entirely.
Have you already settled into your cabins?
Aye, we're just holding seasickness at bay whilst we wait for the captain to make way. I am surprised that the Vorm wishes to join us. They are notoriously frightened of water, are they not?
Triff continued to ignore their conversation and instead watched the other humans scurrying about the deck.
Triff has been on quite a few expeditions in the past. I'm certain that she's become accustomed to it by now. She's been, my Aunt Narama's bar's somewhere for some time, and they've travelled to the western continent before.
Speaking of which, why is your aunt not accompanying us on this expedition? I cannot help thinking that this would be the most rewarding of research projects for any scholar, let alone one that has been so passionately researched in the Isles as she. Not that I can blame her, mind you. I have my own obsession with the islands, without the dramatic attachment.
Emery returned Sans luggage and stood nearby to watch over Rila and the other passengers boarding the ship. Rila winced at Pethara's words and replied,
My aunt has serious business that she must attend to, and sadly, the circumstances have prevented her from joining us. She sent a request to Caliphas asking that Sir Emery be sent to watch over me during this expedition in her stead. I was honestly surprised that they agreed to send a knight to watch over me, as I'm no one special after all, unlike my aunt.
This time it was Emery who winced. He had not been enlightened with this information before, and it caught him off guard. Until now, he had been under the impression that the Knight Commander had chosen him for this pathetic babysitting job. Pethara silently admitted that she had never heard of Rila before today and agreed that the young girl was probably nothing special. In Pethara's many rotations of study, she had met many scholars from the Kingdom of Nath, but she hadn't even been aware that Narama had a niece until now. Not wanting to be rude, Pethara simply replied,
I see.
All aboard for the Andine. Send sail for the coast of Rajtarika. 'Tis your first, last, and only call. We be pulling up the ramp and making way in 5.
The group quickly scurried up the ramp. Triff hissed at the open water beneath them as it splashed up along the wooden planks of the hull.
My lady.
Emery stood waiting at the top of the stairs which led down into the Andine's belly.
Your cabin is this way.
Rila flashed one last smile at Pethara before she obligingly followed Emery down the damp wooden steps, which creaked and squeaked beneath their feet as he led her below deck. The air felt stale, salty, and thick with humidity. Here, he said, stopping in front of the door. His eyes wandered up and down his ward as he stood waiting for her to enter the room, with a look of boredom upon his face.
Where is your cabin, Sir Emery?
He raised a suspicious brow to her question and pointed to an adjacent door.
I shall reside next door to you, of course, my lady.
He was surprised that she would even ask such a question. as it was basic protocol for any Nathan nobility traveling outside of the kingdom. He wondered how often this young lady had previously been allowed to travel, if at all.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you.
Irritated at Rila's lack of speed, Emery opened the door to her cabin and ushered her into the room.
Scream for me if you're dying.
The thudding sound of wood against wood signaled the door being pulled closed behind her.
Oh, this was such a foolish idea.
Rila flung herself onto her cot and Triff fluttered onto the dresser, sporting a glare of displeasure.
Ugh, yuck! The air is so salty and moist here. How long until we reach land again?
If only that were my largest concern at the moment.
You're the one who wanted to tag along on this expedition. You are the one who decided that this was all a fabulous idea. You have no one to blame for this but yourself.
Rila slowly raised her face from the cot where she had been smashing it.
Ugh, I had little choice in the matter, and I had no way of knowing that it would be like this. If only you could understand what I'm going through, then you wouldn't be so quick to judge me.
Ha! 'Tis a bit late for regrets now. The ship has already parted from the docks.
Rila lifted herself into a sitting position and watched as the shoreline began to slip away from her view. She retorted sleepily.
'Twas a bit late long ago.
She had been under immense stress before embarking on this voyage, and the excess anxiety had left her in a constant state of exhaustion.
I only have one rotation.
Rila drifted off to sleep, her expression remaining crimped with worry.
One rotation. More than enough time to learn the secrets of the universe if pressed.
The humid sea air was frizzing up Triff's fur and making her feel grumpy. The moisture caused her fur to cling against the membrane of her wings and made them feel itchy. She ruffled her fur and settled atop the dresser for a cat nap of her own. Her narrowed olive eyes slowly blanked to a close as the rocking of the ship caused her to sway, a sensation which Davomir found to be irrationally soothing. Greetings once more, wonderful watchers. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for your likes, your subscriptions, and your time. You are truly a beautiful soul, and you are deeply appreciated. You deserve to know that we have a Patreon page available for you to join, at your kind leisure, of course. The YouTube algorithm is worse than a rampaging horde of Bokanite, and our generous patrons allow us to continue our battle against it. Furthermore, there are certain episodes that YouTube would frown upon, and thus are only available to our patrons. Please do think it over, and enjoy the rest of your day.